I just think there's a psyop in our society where you have to have health insurance. And I would just say, like, you don't need health insurance. The vast majority of the population, you do not need health insurance. There's a different way.
Our screens are killing us, and our sedentary lifestyles that to some degree are just a part of, the flow of most people's days, sitting in front of a computer, and like they can't escape that hamster wheel.
If we could incentivize physical activity, incentivize eating the right food, I think that would cure our system, even within kind of the broken health insurance space.
Nothing changes fundamentally because the government says this is going to change. What matters is I get to decide what I feed my children.
For every doctor, there's somewhere between 2 and 3 billing people behind the scenes that are needed to actually get that doctor paid. We're here to help you.
Yeah. The famous words of Ronald Reagan. Hey everyone, Michael here with the Bitcoin Way podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. Today on the show, we have Andy Schoonover. He is CEO of CrowdHealth, which is an alternative to traditional health insurance. We talk about the traditional health insurance industry, why it's such a scam, how CrowdHealth is different, how Bitcoin fixes a lot of the problems that we see nowadays in our healthcare system. I think you're going to love this episode. I had an absolute blast chatting with Andy. Hey everyone, like I said in the intro, I've got Andy here with me. Andy, welcome to the Bitcoin Way podcast.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, hey, let's jump right in. We're going to get to Bitcoin and its role in, what I believe to be a very promising future of healthcare, health insurance. But I think we need to start at the beginning because
I'm coming to you from Bitcoin Commons in Austin. So,
I love it. I love it. What an appropriate day for a recording.
Exactly.
Let's talk, and this is a rabbit hole that I've just sort of recently gone down. I told you before we started recording, I'm a recent client of CrowdHealth, and I haven't had the opportunity to use the service, which I think is probably a good thing.
That's a good thing.
It means my family's healthy. But let's just start at the beginning. Why don't you explain what is broken about our traditional healthcare system, how health insurance works? Maybe and take as long as you need with this answer, because I think it's important that people really understand how it works, claim denials, all of those sorts of things.
Sure.
And then I think everything else we talk about will make a lot more sense.
Yeah, I'll give you some context for CrowdHealth, and I'll get into, some of the brokenness. This is my second healthcare company, and I, swore that I was never going to do another one just because it's, so incredibly broken and bureaucratic and regulated and all these things. And, so I sold my previous company and I came off of that. And since, a lot of us get health insurance through my employer, I didn't have an employer anymore. So I had to go find another alternative. So I went to healthcare.gov, which is just a marketplace set under the Affordable Care Act that gives people an opportunity to buy health insurance directly, off of this marketplace that's run by the government or the state departments, depending upon what state you live in. So I went on that and got a plan. It was about, I think it was $1,100 or $1,200 for me, my wife, and my 2 girls. And I kind of joke it worked until I had to use it. My little one, who's 1 at the time, was having a recurring ear infection. So we went to the pediatrician. She's like, oh yeah, she's definitely got some issues. In essence, what's happening is with her ear infections, all this fluid builds up in her eardrums. It has no place to go. And so ultimately what it did is it popped her eardrum. And as you can probably imagine, with a 1-year-old, it sounds like you have a family. A 1-year-old with a popped eardrum is not a fun thing to deal with. But in essence, over time, if that keeps happening, scar tissue builds up and it impacts her long-term hearing. And so we went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. Like, yeah, she has to get tubes in her ears. And in essence, what they do, they stick a little plastic tube in her ear so all that fluid can drain out, so it doesn't bust her eardrums. And so we went and did that. Went in network. My doctor got a pre-authorization to do it. We got out of it, and a few weeks later, we got the bill in the mail. And it was $8,000. It was like, it was a 15-minute procedure, and I was like, $8,000 for 15 minutes is just absolutely nuts. But I have health insurance. Like, that's the whole point of this. And so, unfortunately, I got a note, snail mail, a few weeks after that said it was medically unnecessary, and so the health insurance plan wasn't going to pay for it. We went through 2 rounds of appeals, and they still were like, nope, we're not paying for it. And so I had to stroke an $8,000 check for that for that procedure. As you can probably imagine, I was pretty pissed. So I called my health insurance plan. I said, I quit. If you guys aren't going to pay for something that's so clearly medically necessary, then I'm just not going to do this anymore. And so we quit. Became uninsured. This was at the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020. Actually, when it all went down, it was the middle of 2020 after all the appeals and all this kind of stuff. And so I became uninsured, and my wife kind of looked at me and was like, all right, so what do we do now? We're all conditioned just to think that we have to have health insurance. And I was like, no, we're going to figure out how to do this without having health insurance. And so I, learned over time, over a couple year period, that, I could have negotiated that bill down from 8,000 to probably 2,000. I had a bunch of ear, nose, and throat doctors reach out to me on Twitter when I put this story up that says, oh yeah, we do these in our office for, I think it was like $1,500 or $1,700. And I'm just like, what the hell am I doing? And so in essence, I learned that we could actually shop for healthcare services for significantly less than what these health insurance plans are paying. And ultimately I built a set of tools that I was using for my family. And I was like, man, maybe other people would be interested in this one too. And so it kind of culminated in me founding CrowdHealth, back in 2021. As I was doing research on this, what I found is that, I wasn't the only one. About, 1 in 6 bills are denied by health insurance plans. Mine, unfortunately, was a fairly large one. And if you kind of look at people and how much money they have sitting in the bank, most people don't have $8,000 sitting in the bank to pay for something that, is pretty common. And so, something like 200,000 families are going bankrupt every year as a result of these denied bills or these huge deductibles that they have to pay before the health insurance plan will pick anything up. And so I found that there was for sure a need for an alternative. But ultimately, when you ask the question, what's wrong with our health insurance system or our healthcare system in general, people are like, wow, it's so complex. And my argument would be it's not that complex. And in fact, it's pretty easy to understand, especially for Bitcoiners who understand incentives. You have the buyer of healthcare, which is health insurance. And they actually have an incentive to see bills go up over time. And so let me explain that real quick, just using, easy math. If my premium for my family is $1,000, then the maximum that the health insurance plan can use for the administrative costs and profit is 15% of that. So $150. And so these are for-profit organizations. And so, how do they, grow their revenue by 10% or their profit by 10%? So from $150 to $165. Well, that means your premiums have to go up from $1,000 to $1,100. So they make more money as premiums go up over time. Or said another way, they have an incentive to see prices rise over time. So that's the buyer of healthcare. The seller of healthcare are big hospital systems. And so clearly they have, they're selling a service. They want that service price to go up over time as well. And so in essence, what you have is the buyer of healthcare and the seller of healthcare both wanting the price to go up, and therefore the price goes up. It doesn't take, safety and type of economics to understand when the buyer and seller want something to go up, the price goes up. And so that's ultimately, the problem that we have with healthcare is just misaligned, perverse incentives. It's in economics, they call it a principal agent problem, where the health insurance plan is our agent. We are paying them to go and find us the best rates for these healthcare services and to get them paid when we have a big health event. But actually their incentive is to see prices go up and to deny our bills so that they can maximize their profit in the year. So it's it's a long-winded way of saying that the incentives are just completely perverse within healthcare. There are no market forces that are driving down these costs. And so we have kind of a runaway system that, as we've seen, has resulted in, incredibly high, healthcare costs.
Would the incentives be, hypothetically, and I obviously much prefer what you all are doing versus this system, but would the incentives be changed if these weren't large publicly traded for-profit institutions that, need to go to their shareholders and show that we're making more this year than we had last year, and we anticipate, future earnings to be higher. Like, is there some sort of redemptive opportunity if things were just to be totally shaken up, or are there still other incentives that are misaligned? Obviously, like the obvious one, I think, being the more sick you are, the more you're going to use these
Yeah, totally.
services. That's one unavoidable, I think, challenge in healthcare. But is there something like that you could dream up that you're like, if we shifted our attention or our priorities or our incentives in this area, we might see a positive result from that? Or is it just we got to blow it up?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to blow it up. I don't think there's any kind of iterative type of improvements that we can make to substantially change the system the way that it's currently structured. I mean, I think you in essence have to blow it up. Well, with that said, I mean, I think there are ways to incentivize people to be healthier. I mean, we've got something like 70% of people entering into the Medicare age, which is 65s, with a chronic disease. We have 88% of our population that are metabolically unhealthy. And so, if we could eat better, if we could put food in our body that actually nourishes us as opposed to destroys our body, that would be one way. I don't know how do you incentivize that, but that would be, a way to cure the system, if you would. So that was the only thing. And clearly, getting out and moving your body and exercising. How do you incentivize those two things? But if we could incentivize physical activity, incentivize eating the right food, I think that would cure our system, even within kind of the broken health insurance space. I just don't know how to do that in an effective way. I think a lot of these health insurance plans are saying, well, if you, take 5,000 steps a day all month, we'll give you a $30, rebate or something. And I just don't see $30 really moving the needle for people to actually go out there and do it. I mean, these systems have been in place for a long, long time, and they haven't impacted the numbers at all. So yeah, I mean, if we could figure out food and physical activity, I think that would go a long, long way. I just don't know how you do that within our existing system.
Yeah, and two, I mean, there are more sort of insidious variables at play here too. Like I've started to go down the rabbit hole of light exposure. Not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Jack Kruse, but I mean, he talks about, like, our screens are killing us, and our sedentary lifestyles that to some degree are just a part of the flow of most people's days, sitting in front of a computer, and like they can't escape that hamster wheel as easily as they could maybe change their diet.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious. Do you think what does Bitcoin fix? I can think of a dozen things that I think trend us in a better direction, but is there something fundamental about the system as it is today that a Bitcoin, like, and you can think hypothetically about like a Bitcoin standard or just more people adopting Bitcoin? Because I found out about you, I think, because of Safety. I think Safety had you on the show and started listening. It took me a long time to come around to this is. I think what I've become is so anti everything establishment that
Yeah.
I kind of jumped into CrowdHealth without having a very full understanding. I was done with like, we had a couple of things come up with health insurance, and I was just sort of done. But I guess back to my question after that ramble, what does Bitcoin fix as it relates to health insurance, the healthcare industry, or the sick care industry, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting because this is one of those questions that I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer, because I don't really consider myself a philosopher, much like, and I'm not nowhere clear to save Dane and some of the other Bitcoiners out there who have much better perspectives on this. But I don't know about you, but the people that I meet within the Bitcoin community just do life differently. I think it's the high time preference versus the low time preference mentality of Bitcoiners that people who weren't in Bitcoin and then get into Bitcoin start to really understand. And I don't know the kind of the ultimate reason for that, other than you have a community of people who are all kind of contrarians in the way that we think. And by being contrarian, you go against some of the cultural norms of eating garbage, being sedentary, buying, luxury goods, all the time with your fiat money. And so I think it's this fiat mentality that people have gotten into, that the government will take care of us or a mega corporation will take care of us. And I think we need to get back to this. No. I'm personally responsible. I take individual sovereignty, over my own life. And I think that then incentivizes people just by this internal motivation that gets people to act in more responsible ways. So again, I don't know what the reason is for that, but I'll tell you that the Bitcoiners within our community are much better buyers of healthcare than the non-Bitcoiners, because I think they understand the impact of their purchases. And so, I don't know what it is about Bitcoiners, man, but if the United States was 350 million Bitcoiners, I think we would be looking at a very different kind of financial situation, a very different healthcare situation than what we currently have. So I don't know the right answer to that question. I think it's a question for the ages, that if we can get people to think like Bitcoiners, I think it would change a lot in this country.
Yeah, I mean, much like my vote for CrowdHealth was is much of a vote against sort of the traditional system. I think, like I don't eat junk food anymore. Like I just, and the reason isn't because I don't enjoy it or I don't think I could get away with it from time to time. But first of all, I've got a major sweet tooth, and so I know if I go down that, it's never going to end.
Me too.
But second, I think it's just like it's sort of a stick it to the man mentality. It's like, I know that I'm letting, these large food companies win when I consume their product. And I went from feeling sort of that felt benign to it felt like, an absolute abuse of my personal beliefs. And I think that my curiosity, though, is I think as the sort of innovators and early adopters of Bitcoin, we tend to be like a disagreeable bunch. What I don't know is if Bitcoin is going to change or alter the incentives for like the next wave of the early majority and the late majority of adopters, or if they're just going to sort of more passively use it as money because it's going up in price or whatever, but without maybe doing the hard work that many of us before have done to understand how it should change your incentives and lowering time preference and all of those good things. So yeah, I think you're right. There is no obvious answer because it's human action in play, and it's hard to get a read as to what people are going to do.
Yeah, I think it is a long game. I mean, I think it's a long game. I think that people, if they get into Bitcoin, they over time, and I'm not saying it's 6 months or a year. I think it's probably a decade. Start to take on that Bitcoin mentality, which is ultimately that we don't need to rely upon megacorps or the government to take care of us. We can, live a more fulfilling, thriving life by taking on personal responsibility. And that's not something that takes a year. It takes probably a generation,
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that you said kind of reminded me of, one of the things that I'm really trying to like drive home to people is that, again, back to the time preference, like the things we do in our 30s, 40s, and 50s are impacting how we live life in our 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I think it's that low time preference view of life, which is, kind of countercultural and counter to what we inherently feel as human beings, which is just, acquire. That is just hard to break that. But I think ultimately that leads to a life on kind of a hedonic treadmill where we try to get better, more, as opposed to like, no. Like instead of eating the cookies today, why don't we think about what all these, cookies every single day are going to do when we're, 80 years old, and we have to live the last 5 years of our life or whatever in a nursing home because we have, a major chronic disease. I think one of my missions at CrowdHealth is, I say this because I truly mean it, and I've seen parents and grandparents and things go through things, but like I really want our CrowdHealth members to be the most healthy members going into the, the Medicare type of population. And I want them to be, 80 years old playing wiffle ball in the backyard with their grandkids. Like that to me is a thriving life. And that to me is more important than eating the Girl Scout cookies, that are sitting in the refrigerator. And so I think people, if they can look out 20 or 30 years, as opposed to looking out 2 or 3 days, I think is really ultimately where we need to be as a society. And I think, Bitcoin for sure inspires that. And again, I don't know why, but it just does. I mean, ever since I became a Bitcoiner, my view on my health, my view on what I do with my money, my view on how I can look at my faith, like all of these things like have kind of changed as a result of just understanding the low time preference benefits. And that's a generational shift. I hope it's our generation that begins that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think too, one of the things we're talking about here is we're sort of speculating on in the short term as individuals adopt Bitcoin, but I think that's a very different conversation from long term. If the world is or even large nation states are operating on a Bitcoin standard, I think it becomes much more apparent how Bitcoin fixes a lot of these things because there is no backstop. You can't print more, right? So like a lot of the handouts that people come to expect and the personal responsibility that they're able to evade goes away. I mean, you can no longer hide from that because you can't print more Bitcoin. And so, I think it needs to. My hope is that time comes soon. I recognize, the need for patience, but also it could be a messy unwinding if it happens too fast. And hopefully we just sort of find a nice segue into a bright orange future, in the coming years or decades.
You know what? I think we've really been kind of conditioned over the last 50 years to, instead of having self-reliance, to rely on, these big entities to take care of us. And I think it's kind of infiltrating just our daily lives. I kind of take the example, and I think it's right, but back when I'm 45, so I'm a little bit maybe older than the typical Bitcoiner, but when somebody moved into your neighborhood, back in the day, what would you do? You'd go over and introduce yourselves, and you'd probably bring them cookies, which is probably not the best thing, but it's this like, welcome to the neighborhood. And I feel like society has shifted to be more like, what did this person pay for their house? Because that's more indicative of what my house is worth, as opposed to like welcoming people into the neighborhood. And I say that because I think that this sense of community has kind of broken. I think that is because we no longer are kind of responsible for our neighbor. And, it's like the government, health insurance, whatever, has stepped in between and said, no, you don't have to take care of people in your community. You don't have to help. You don't have to be generous. Let us do it. And so we're centralizing generosity in essence. And that is being done through taxes. We're sending something to a central authority. The central authority then is dictating, what these people get, as opposed to like, if somebody's on the street corner and they're in my community, like, me as a community member, I feel like I have some responsibility to help that person. Whereas in our current day, focus on let the government do it. You drive by that person and you say, well, why aren't they getting government help? Why aren't they getting SNAP? Why aren't they going to the shelter? Why aren't they doing those types of things? As opposed to being like, no. Like, we as a community have an obligation to help somebody who's having a really tough time. And I know that's kind of countercultural to like, or counterintuitive when we've talked about like a lot of personal responsibility, but I think there's a community aspect of this too that is just really powerful, very needed, and I think is beautifully shown within the Bitcoin community. I mean, I don't know of any community that I've been a part of where the Bitcoin community kind of rallies around each other and, is helps each other out. And so there's just a tribal nature to this that I think is inherent, given we all come from tribes, back in the day, that I think the Bitcoin community is showing. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a philosopher. I don't know. I'm not an anthropologist. But I do believe that there's something around this, like unwinding of community and reliance upon centralized decision makers that have led to a fall in ultimately personal responsibility. I think we need to start stripping some of those things away. I mean, we're trying to do it on the health insurance side where, hey, you don't need health insurance. Instead of like relying upon a centralized authority to help out these people, why don't we have a community of almost 10,000 people who are willing to fund each other's healthcare expenses. And many, many, many of those are Bitcoiners, so we have people all the time being like, we had a guy who had colon cancer in Dallas, and he's like, crazy story. He went in for ER for kidney stones. And as he was in there and they're doing the scans, they're like, man, you got something on your colon. You need to go get a colonoscopy. He went to got a colonoscopy. He found out he had, I think it was stage 2 colon cancer. And I kind of joke, he's the only guy on the planet that is excited about having gotten kidney stones, right? Because that it probably would have killed him if he didn't get those kidney stones. But the moral of the story is like, he actually reached out to us and was like, look, I want the best doctors available, but can you help me negotiate these rates? Because I don't want to screw the community. I don't want to overburden the community by my health issue. And that is so countercultural. And only when you get into a community of people who have a shared worldview, do you care about them in addition to caring about yourself? Because you have this just culture of like, it's about me, 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 me. Whereas I think we're building a community of people who are like, yeah, it is about you and getting your bills paid, but it's also about the community, because if the community does well, then you're actually paying lower for your healthcare costs than if we were just to go out and spend on whatever we need. I mean, the problem with health insurance is you don't ultimately pay for it. The health insurance company pays for it, right? And so there's just no desire at all to pay attention to prices or utilization or any of these things. And so, in essence, I kind of say that, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And so within the health insurance space, you are the product. People are making money off of you. And so that's the dynamic we're trying to change at CrowdHealth. And so far it's been, working beautifully.
Man, so much we could unpack there, and I couldn't agree more. And we've seen, what you describe as our community helping one another. We see that all the time with, Ross Ulbricht is like a very prominent example. But then
he would still be in jail today if it wasn't for the Bitcoin community rallying behind him. It's a perfect example.
Yeah, but even like there was I don't know if you saw on Twitter in the last month and a half, a guy lost his seed phrase. He'd been stacking for a long time trying to get to 1 Bitcoin. And I was fortunate that I kind of got roped in with some other guys. Like we're going to help him get set up in proper self-custody. He had a ton of people sending him sats,
Amazing.
And it's a unique thing. And I think part of it is the low time preference behavior that Bitcoin just forces upon you. And then we're fortunate that the revolution we're a part of is one of is a monetary one, and we are accumulating wealth, and our wealth is continuing to grow, and we have the opportunity to do that. I saw a meme recently that said something to the effect of, if we sent 6-month-olds to government schools and they taught those kids how to walk, after 2 generations, we would think that without the government, kids would never learn how to walk. And I think that's sort of the paradigm that you're describing here. We're so accustomed to, like when you talk about like helping your neighbor, dropping off, or going and introducing yourself to your neighbor. I think I should drop off ribeyes if I have anyone move into nearby me instead of cookies. But it's like, man, if we didn't have the government, we wouldn't be taking care of the poor people or whoever. It's like, if you give me 25 or 30% of my money back that you steal from me every year, watch what I do with it. Like, I would be more than happy. And you know what? I would do it without the administrative overhead that any government agency is going to have. So, it would be a powerful thing, but we take for granted it wasn't always that way. And it doesn't have to be that way. And it would be much better off. It would be much better off if it wasn't.
If you look at the just generosity of Americans over the last 50 years, the percentage of income that people actually give away has gone down like this,
Yeah.
and so it's like they're stealing our generosity because we're just relying upon the government to take care of it. And I think that is a harmful, unhealthy perspective.
Yeah.
With crowd health, like it's cool because you get to know exactly where your money goes. If Michael Jordan gets hurt playing basketball, I'm sending you. Sorry, I had to just once. It'll be my only
No,
reference.
no, you're good.
I get to send money directly to Michael with his thing. I'm not sending it to United Healthcare, not having any idea how United Healthcare is going to do that. I'm not sending it to the government and hoping that the government pays for it. Like I'm sending my money directly to Michael, and Michael now has money to go and pay for his, what his basketball injury. And so, we oftentimes get cases where we send out, the most recurring one we get is like miscarriages. We send out a request to help somebody with a miscarriage, and there's cost associated with that. And oftentimes the women will come back and be like, "Man, I know what this family is going through. I've been there. I know the pain that they're feeling. Instead of $100 this month, can I send them $200?" And to me, it's like you would never call United Healthcare and be like, "Can I give you more money this month?" Like it just never happens, right? But we're kind of instilling or trying to like reinvigorate the generosity within the community, and that's kind of one of my submissions is like to reinstill a sense of generosity within people. Because I know, when my family's been generous or whatever, like, man, that's awesome. That feels good. Like there's joy there when we can help somebody out in a difficult situation. Um, and the fact that us Bitcoiners have the capital to do that, because we're typically not allowing the fiat monetary system to be a big part of our financial outcome. We have the finances then to go out and help. Whereas with a fiat system, those excess finances are sucked away from you, whether it would be through inflation or taxes or whatever it may be. So give people money, and I think they will allocate the money the way that they want to allocate that money, as opposed to what some megacorp or government wants to allocate that money. And as you said, it becomes way more efficient, and I think it builds community, and I think it alleviates some of this like me versus you behavior that we see within our country right now. I'll give money to somebody on the left just as well as I give somebody on the right. Like if somebody's having a hard, difficult time, as long as it's like not self-inflicted, I don't care, what your political stance is. I'm more than happy to help. So I think we need more of that in our culture, and for some reason, kind of the Bitcoiners and just that low time preference mentality, that self sovereignty mentality is something that reignites generosity, which I love about the community.
I love that. I think that's also a good segue into CrowdHealth. Why could you explain how CrowdHealth works, and maybe sort of juxtapose it with traditional health insurance, and maybe even elaborate on why you chose to have the mechanics in place to make it work the way it does?
Yeah, sure. So, CrowdHealth, real quick, is we've got about 10,000 people in the community who've all kind of raised their hand to say, "Hey, if somebody else in the community gets hurt, I'm willing to help." And so, if somebody breaks their arm and it's $5,000, we ask them to come up with the first 500. We want you to have skin in the game, and then we'll send the remaining 4,500 to the community. So, just for easy math, let's say we're asking everybody in the community for $100. We'll ask 45 people for that $100, and if they say yes, then money will go from their account to the person who needs help account. And then after 45 people say yes, they'll have $4,500 plus the $500 they're contributing to go and pay for their broken arm or whatever it is. And then the cool part about that is, given that they're paying the doctor directly, these doctors in these facilities don't have to spend the administrative costs of billing health insurance. So, the estimates are somewhere between 30 and 40% of revenue is sucked up with just administrative costs of billing. Whereas if you, write them a check or pay with a credit card, or even better, pay them over Lightning, like those costs are either, next to nothing or a couple percent. Right. And so, you're in essence stripping out all that administrative cost, all the rent seekers in between you and your doctor. And as a result, you can get way better prices. So, Prices for kind of the big events that we're dealing with, that we're helping people pay, are about 50% less than what United Healthcare would pay for the exact same procedure. So you're getting way better prices if you pay the doctor directly, and you have that doctor-patient relationship is reestablished, because doctors currently have to get approval to provide you care from the health insurance plan. But with us, it's between you and your doctor. You guys do what you want to do for you both to think that you can get back to being healthy. You get to the core root of the issues, and so it's just a way better way of doing healthcare. You pay directly for almost everything else in life except for healthcare. You rely upon somebody else to pay it for you, and therefore that disconnect creates tons of friction and tons of cost. And so we rip that out by enabling you to pay in cash or Bitcoin or whatever when you go to your doctor. So that's kind of the foundation from which we are created, is enable people to pay cash, rip those expenses out. A couple interesting stats. One is, for every doctor, there's somewhere between 2 and 3 billing people behind the scenes that are needed to actually get that doctor paid. The other thing is, a survey just came out, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months ago, where doctors are spending about 15 and a half hours a week on administrative tasks. Most of that goes to billing health insurance. So imagine you have to, if you have a 5-day week, you have to spend almost 2 of those days just to fight your employer to get paid. Like, that means you're wickedly inefficient during those 2 days, right? So what if we can give those 2 days back to doctors so they can do what they are really good at doing, which is providing care to human beings? You just kind of restore all of that by paying them directly, as opposed to having health insurance in the middle of that. So that's in essence what we're enabling. And that's a little bit of how the mechanics work. I'm happy to fill in any gaps there, but we've done that for somewhere between 20 and 25,000 bills over the last 3 years. And 99.8% of them have gotten fully funded. The 0.2% are people who have asked to get things from the community, but haven't been willing to give to the community. So rewind, when I say we asked 45 people, those 45 people have a decision. They can say yes to that funding event or no. And if they say yes, then the money transfers. If they say no, we just move on to the next person. But if that person who said no then asks for money from the community, we tell the community, here's the last 10 times that they've been asked, what have they said? Have they said yes, 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 or have they said no, 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 no? And the people who said no, 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 in essence, not willing to give to other people in the community members see that. And most times, 90% of the time, they're like, man, I'm not going to give to this person. They're not willing to give to others and when they're in need. So there's this kind of reciprocity engine that drives what we do. And again, it's kind of based on generosity. And it's not 100% altruistic, because if you say no to somebody else, then the community will know that you said no to somebody else. And so it incentivizes you to help other people in the community. But those mechanics have worked, really, really well. And so I said, like, somewhere between 20 and 25,000 bills. And it's everything from like little pediatric visits that are, under $100 to, mega issues. We had a guy in Montana. He was fishing. He was in bear country, wolf country. And so he had a 44 in his old holster, and he caught a fish. He leaned down, the gun fell out of his holster, hit perfectly on a rock, but it fired, went into his calf, out the back of his calf, into his thigh, out the top of his thigh, into his chest, and out the back. So 1 bullet, 6 holes. And, that one is hundreds of thousands of dollars, approaching $1 million. And that one's gotten fully funded by the community. So it's, both for the small bills and the big bills.
Wow. That is wild. So I love this model, and it sort of harkens back to what you were talking about. Like, I think shame is an underappreciated value. This is what you're kind of describing is the way communities have historically worked, right? Like, if you were the town bum and you weren't helping anyone, you didn't share, you didn't pitch in, whatever, like you were ostracized, or people just kind of let you do your own thing. And like, we're not going to be there for you if you're not going to be there for us. And what you're doing is just bringing back like these traditional values to health health costs. And I think that's an important. I think it's just an important value to have. It's like make shame great again. And you're right. It's not fully altruistic when you know that you're not going to get covered, but it creates the right incentives, and I think that's important. Like we rely on each other for certain things, and unfortunately, we live in a society where because of everything we've talked about before, we rely on each other less and less. I think if we can get back to that and make shame great again, I think I think we're all going to benefit. So, am I correct in
I always say this, like,
understanding?
if your neighbor, jams all night long and parties until 3 a.m. and keeps you awake, right? And then comes to you the next day asking for, something out of your pantry because they don't have something. What is the probability that you're actually going to give that to that person?
Yeah.
Right. Like there's something about like we as a community all have to act individually responsible to be a good community. And so, that's where, some of my Bitcoiners are like, oh, well, you guys are all about community and not about personal responsibility. It's like, no. Like, I want to be in community with people who all take personal responsibility. Like, that's who I want to be a part of. Right. And so, in essence, that's what we're kind of doing with CrowdHealth. Like, look, if one of your CrowdHealth members, jams all night long and parties until 3 a.m. and keeps you up, you're probably not going to help them, just using that analogy. But, it's a well-functioning community when everybody is personally responsible and takes care of themselves, but still thinks about the community and their personal actions and how it impacts the people around them. And so that's kind of the fundamental system that we're built on. Like I said, it's worked incredibly well over, a substantial number of bills.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So am I correct in understanding if you have like, I took my daughter to, she's one, she's had 2 ear infections in the last month, might need to check into tubes. I don't know. But if I took her to the doctor and, they prescribe an antibiotic or something, and the cost of that visit is $100, am I correct that as a subscriber, I would cover that because it doesn't meet that $500 threshold? Is that right? Like really what you're being covered for by the community are those more expensive events. Is that right?
Yeah. What we do is we say, you pay the first $500 of any health event. But let's just say your daughter, went to the pediatrician, and had, an ear infection, and then had another one and had another one. And then the pediatrician's finally like, look, we need to get tubes in our ears. So you had to have a surgery, and you might have a prescription or something associated with that. That entire set of doctor's visits, prescriptions, surgeries is one health event. And so we ask you to pay the first $500 of that. And then anything above that $500, then we will submit to the community for funding.
Okay,
There's one caveat to that. We want people to go and get, wellness visits every year. My wellness visit just looks like getting a full set of labs, and CrowdHealth will submit up to $300 of any kind of preventative related visit that you have that month. So if you go, if your wife goes to the gynecologist, or your kids go to the pediatrician or the primary care doc, whatever, one of those visits per year up to $300 is eligible for funding. And so that's the one caveat to that 500, because we don't want people to not go to the doctor because they can't afford it. And so that's that. And then the other thing too is we have unlimited amounts of virtual urgent care eligible. So, if you have something that's urgent, there's a virtual urgent care doc link in our app. You just press it, and typically within a couple minutes, you can talk to a doctor, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, your daughter probably has an ear infection. Here's what you need to do." And that's fully fundable by the community, those virtual care visits. And that's served people really, really well.
Okay, I love that. So I go on my CrowdHealth app and I see you've got settings, so I can auto contribute to green events, which are effectively, as I understand it, your team has verified that the cost of the event is based on fair market pricing, and or maybe this has been a generous member. So like I want to help generous members. I want to help people who are making prudent decisions about who they engage for health services. Um, so my question, and this is more of a selfish question, I'm just sort of trying to discern how it all works for the red events. Either it's a member who hasn't been sufficiently generous, or perhaps the service didn't meet some threshold for fair market value in terms of the cost. What I'm curious about is, so like if my son broke his leg and we're kind of in an urgent situation, right? Like I'm not going to
Yeah, yeah,
message the CrowdHealth team and say, "Hey, what doctor should I go to for my son's broken leg?" I'm going to get to the
100%.
closest place. Is that going to be covered regardless, or are you going to negotiate the price? Like how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what happens with some of these urgent emergency type of situations? You'll typically go to the ER. And the ER, you never pay at the ER. You'll get those bills afterwards. And then what you do is you go into our app, you take a picture of the bill, those upload to us, we'll consolidate them, and then we'll negotiate after the fact on your behalf. So, if you go to X and follow our Join Crowd Health, you'll see we usually about once a week we share like a great negotiation that we've done, and so we can negotiate on your behalf with that hospital to get that price down. Because typically what the hospital will do is they'll just give you a massive price, and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do with this? And it's a fake price in essence. And so we've got a team of people who can actually negotiate those bills down for you. And then once we have a negotiated bill, we go back to you and we say, hey, this ER visit was $20,000. We negotiated it down to $5,000. Are you okay with us now going and funding that? And you'll say, yep, go ahead. You'll pay the first 500. We'll go out and fund the remaining 4,500. And so if it's an emergency situation, like you're not calling us on the way to the ER and be like, what ER should we go to? And it's like, no. The only thing that we ask you to do is call us in terms of like some of these big scheduled procedures. So let's just say, you went to the ER. The ER was like, oh yeah, like this one's bad. Like you're going to have surgery to fix this. Then we ask you like, hey, will you call us? Because then we can find you a great orthopedic surgeon wherever you live. And we can pre-negotiate a price as opposed to you just walking in and then giving you some random price. It be way, way, way too high. And so all we just do is ask, like, for these big procedures, non-ER, just call us and let us, help you find a really great doc. And if you have a really great doc, that's great. We can call them and we can negotiate the price directly with them. But that's the only thing we ask. And that's where it comes into the fair market price. Because if you go and get like a colonoscopy, for example, you're not going to be able to find a colonoscopy under $3,500 or $4,000, whereas we can find colonoscopies for $1,200. And so it's like, please call us so that we can show you what docs. And the cool thing about this too is now that we have 10,000 members, these are 10,000 members all over the country who've gone to docs probably in your city, most metropolitan areas, and they've said, "Man, this doc was great. Did a great job. The price was reasonable. Had a great experience." And so wouldn't you want to go to a doc like that versus a doctor that, the hospital system is going to refer you to, which is probably a part of their hospital system. So they're referring you to somebody else so they get paid more. We can lead you to really great docs. And we've gotten such great feedback from our members who are like, wow, that doc was awesome. So that's the only thing that we help you with. One other thing that you said I just want to clarify for people listening is we will ask you once per month, sometimes twice, but most of the time once per month to help somebody else out in the community. And you've got 48 hours to decide, do I want to give or do I not want to give? And if you ignore it, then it automatically triggers a yes, I will give. But you have settings in your app that can say, hey, just anything that's a green bill, which means the member is generous and the bill is reasonable, just say yes automatically. So we're not asking you to engage a ton in the system. You can like set these settings and set it and forget it if you want to. Or you can set it to, hey, I want to make a manual entry every month. And you can do that too. So we're just trying to create some settings to make it, not administratively, burdensome on you every month.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what are some of the biggest concerns or areas of pushback you all face? Like because I'll tell you, I mean, for me, I think my thought was maybe my reluctance initially until I lowered my time preference was what if I had what if my wife had breast cancer, or like we had a catastrophic car accident? You know, the big insurers can pay that out. Now, it's a big question of if they will, but they're also sort of too big to fail kind of organizations. So like that was kind of my concern initially. Eventually, I just said enough is enough. Like I'm just not putting a vote into this system anymore. What is it that you typically hear though that maybe people are reluctant about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big ones, like what you just said, like what happens if something really big happens. I mean, just described to you one where it's like a bill that's approaching $1 million, and that one got fully paid, and that guy is like our biggest advocate. And this is one where he's in the middle of nowhere, and we had to medevac him out via helicopter because the closest hospital was like 2 hours away. He wouldn't survive, and so this is a big one. We've also had, I think we're in dozens now of cancer cases, and they're the bad ones: the breast cancer, the colon cancer. We've had some really non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We can negotiate these bills down, and these are not nearly as expensive when you're paying directly as opposed to paying with health insurance. I'll give you one example. We had a member with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the hospital said, "Yeah, you need to be on this drug," and that drug was $40,000 a month. And so we went directly to the manufacturer of this drug, the pharmaceutical company, and said, "Hey, this person is uninsured. We can pay you direct. How much would this drug be?" And it ended up being like $2,500 a month. So we negotiated from 40 grand a month to $2,500 a month. Like the number of rent seekers between the providers and the payment are so egregious that you can flash those bills, sometimes 90% plus, by just getting rid of all the middlemen and going directly to the service provider, right? And so, we've done this now, thousands of times with some of these big bills, and I think every bill above $1,000 has gotten fully funded to date. So it has worked. And yeah, sure. When I first started and we had 100 members, was I worried about it? Hell yeah, I was worried about it. But now we when I see some of these big bills come in, I'm like, all right, we got this. We had a little kid who was born with Down syndrome, and he was in the NICU for a long time. I think it was a couple of months. Then he had to have heart surgery because some of these kids with Down syndrome have heart issues, and he had to get cochlear implants because he can't hear. And so we walked through that with this family, and they're actually going to do a mini documentary testimonial on their process with CrowdHealth because it was so great that they got all these bills paid for. Another one that was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and got it funded. So like my family is on it. I just still don't have health insurance. I just have CrowdHealth. So I'm eating what I'm cooking, and I'm very, very comfortable that if my family were to have, something really, really big, the community would step up for me.
That's fantastic. All right, let's shift gears here for a minute. First, I think that was a fantastic overview of CrowdHealth, and I think everything you described is exactly why we're talking and why I'm a subscriber. So there is a lot of talk now, a lot of eyes being open to not only healthcare, but just like the health or maybe lack of healthy lifestyles in our country today. What's your take, if you're willing to share, and we don't have to go overtly political, but just, on the Maha movement, RFK, some of the things he's talking about. Do you have any particular thoughts on what the implications of this would be? Are you excited? Where's your head at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, I like RFK. I think is it next week that he's going to actually go to the Senate for confirmation. I know that it moved past the first stage. I think it's somewhere like next Monday or Tuesday where he's going to get voted on by the entire Senate. I'm more excited about RFK because I know he's a Bitcoiner. And so I think, was it 2 years ago that he gave a speech at Bitcoin? Was it 23 maybe?
Just last. Well,
was it last year?
I think he might have spoken 2 years in a row. I was there this past summer, 2024, when he spoke though.
Okay, yeah, and it was like his was the speech of the entire conference. Like he clearly got it, he clearly knew that there needs to be decentralization. Um, and so I'm more excited about that. Like anytime we look to the government to be our savior, like I'm not like overly optimistic. And so I'm not like wickedly optimistic that this is going to massively change, what we do as a country in terms of health. I think, is it going to be, a step forward? Absolutely. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about looking at some of these vaccines and seeing, let's follow the science and see what they're really doing to us. Because I think, the fact that it was like, what is it, 1 in 1,000 kids or something like that were autistic, and now it's 1 in 34 or 1 in 36 or something. Like, there's clearly something going on. And, as a dad to kids, like I'm very interested in understanding, what the science is, who's influencing the science, what kind of pharmaceutical companies are supporting some of these studies that don't show, some of these, vaccine injuries. And so I'm excited about that, but I think that is probably, a tiny percentage of what, is going on in our country. I have not heard from RFK specifically how we're going to reduce chronic disease. And so I'm not, wickedly optimistic about that. But I think it is a good thing to have the spotlight on our health, because I don't think that has been a substantial, spotlight in the past. It is, let us take care of you as the government, as opposed to you need to get healthy. And so I like the messaging change. I'll wait and see if there's actually like a reasonable change in habits, from our fellow Americans. But yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic.
I think cautious optimism is probably a safe place to be. That's sort of how I feel. I think what I'm beginning to feel more and more, because I agree. I think RFK seems sincere in his concerns. We've been let down by plenty of politicians. I'm very open to that happening too. It does feel though, like having transparency as to what you're putting into your body, I think makes a lot of sense. And if it takes the government to sort of help with that, and maybe reduce some of the pharmaceutical ads and some of the manipulative tactics that these companies take, I think great. It still feels like a Band-Aid on this very complex web
Right.
of perverse incentives with from politicians who own stakes in companies and public companies trying to boost their earnings. Like I don't see us on that. That's like an economic problem, that not a well, it's a corruption problem, but it's an economic one in nature, I think, more than it is a health problem. And so hopefully he can shed light on these things. But it's like, they've had labels on cigarettes forever, and you can't run cigarette commercials on TV, and people still smoke. I mean, the rates have declined, I think, but more people are vaping. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, are we really winning because less people are smoking? I don't know. If people stop consuming so many seed oils and they start putting beef tallow in things, but it's still a highly processed product, like I just don't know. So I'm hopeful that maybe we see some positive change. I think at the end of the day, and this is what you keep going back to that I think is so important, nothing changes fundamentally because the government says this is going to change. What matters is I get to decide what I feed my children, and I get to decide how sedentary my lifestyle is. And we need to get back to this place of personal responsibility. And I think what you're doing at CrowdHealth is recreating those incentives for people. If everyone decided that I'm just going to, let myself go, I don't really care, I'm not going to focus and prioritize my health, well, suddenly CrowdHealth is going to look a lot more expensive, and like the costs of everything are going to go up, and it just doesn't work. Like I think we're realigning these incentives, but it begins at the individual level, and
Yeah,
you
I
got to
agree.
stop. The government can't be your backstop for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I am optimistic about is I'm hoping that the current administration allows companies like ours to go out and innovate as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to overregulate.
Mm.
I think we've gotten here by, a government overreach and regulation, which just stifles innovation, all in the name of consumer protection. And I think it is not consumer protection. I think it's control. I think it's a sense of power that these bureaucrats have over, small innovative companies like ours. So I'm hoping this administration will allow people to go out and start trying to innovate in some of these highly regulated industries, because I think that's the only way that we're gonna, bust out of some of these, death spirals of healthcare and the medical industrial complex. So I'm fairly confident on that one, and I'm excited to see kind of what they do in terms of some of the regulations.
Do you feel hamstrung in certain ways? Like, I don't really understand the regulatory landscape in this industry. Is there anything in particular that you're like, if only we could,
Yeah, man,
but you got to be careful.
it's a good question. I mean, I'll give you one like very tactical thing. I want our Bitcoiners to talk to a doc who is a Bitcoiner, who's got the same worldview as a Bitcoiner,
Amen.
And so what I'd like to do is to hire one doc who can see any Bitcoiner anywhere they are in the entire country. But you can't do that because doctors have to be approved. They have to be licensed in each state in which they operate. So if there's a doctor in Texas, they can't see somebody in Wyoming or whatever, because they're not licensed in Wyoming. And the last time I checked is a person in Texas and a person in Wyoming are the same, physiological makeup, right? It doesn't matter. And so, if I want a Bitcoin doc to be able to see all of my members who are Bitcoiners, they have to go and get licensed in every single state that I have a Bitcoiner. And that is hundreds of thousands of dollars to go and do that. Like it becomes financially unfeasible. And so it's things like that are just stupid regulatory things. And I'm like, let's just rip that out, right? Because right now, if I want to do that, I have to find a Bitcoin doc in each state that can see my Bitcoiner in that state. And that just, I don't have the scale to do that, right? Like I've got, I guess 1,500 people in Texas, but I've got 5 people in Rhode Island. Like I can't, hire a doctor in Rhode Island to see 5 people. Like I just can't do it. And so it's some of these stupid regulatory things that make no sense that they need to get rid of to help people, innovate and get better care. If there's a great doctor in Idaho that I want to see, I should be able to see that doctor, even though he's not licensed in Texas where I live. So, it's those types of things that I hope they can, get rid of.
Yeah, man, we do not hate the nanny state enough. That's for sure. It's insane. I mean, all the credentialism and certification. I mean, like I remember my barber it took him forever to go through to be able to use a straight razor because of all the, it's just, it's total nonsense. It's like, let me decide if I want to trust that guy with a straight razor. It's
exactly,
it's insanity. Well,
we're the government. Yeah. We're here to help. We're here to help you.
Yeah. The famous words of Ronald Reagan. Well, hey man, we're at the top of the hour. I got one more question for you. This is a fun one I ask at the end to everyone. What is an unpopular opinion that you hold? And you get bonus points if you offend some Bitcoiners with your answer.
Man, you want me to offend people right here at the end? I'm going to take the easy route because it's what we've been talking about. I just think there's a psyop in our society where you have to have health insurance. And I would just say, like, you don't need health insurance. The vast majority of the population, you do not need health insurance. There's a different way. And if you're a Bitcoin out there and you're fed up with our system, fed up with the healthcare system, like, come join us because we're trying to create scale, of Bitcoiners. Because ultimately what I want to do is, and we've got the system set up already, is to have, Bitcoin circularity within the healthcare system. This is a $5 trillion system. If we can have Bitcoin be the standard of, payment within healthcare, I mean, I think that goes to a long way to hyper Bitcoinization. And so, I would just say, if you're a Bitcoiner and you want to support Bitcoin companies, we are truly trying to get a group of Bitcoiners together that can change healthcare. And I think we can do it. So, if you're in that decision process, we'd love for y'all to join us.
I love it. Andy, hey, why don't you give everyone a handoff, tell them where they can find you, learn more about CrowdHealth and anything else you want to share.
Yeah. Joincrowdhealth.com is where you'll find us. And if you go on X, X, Instagram, all the social media platforms, we're at Join CrowdHealth. We are about to, in the next couple of weeks, do our quarterly quarter cow contest, which means we give a quarter of a cow to somebody a random person who follows us on Instagram, or excuse me, on any of our social media platforms. So if you are interested in winning a quarter cow delivered directly to your door, grass fed, grass finished, good stuff, then join us on our social media accounts. Join CrowdHealth.
Oh man, I'll be doing that. That's my diet right there. Well, Andy, man, thank you so much for your time. I get to sit here and talk to you all day, and learned a lot. Appreciate everything you're doing. Keep up the good work. This is so important. And for everyone listening, do check out CrowdHealth. I'm still a new enough user. I can't speak to the user experience specifically, but I love the concept, and am excited to be finished with health insurance for good. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Let's do it again.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a wrap. Again, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Andy. Go check out CrowdHealth. Check out everything they're doing. I absolutely love this concept. Would encourage you to consider, do you really need traditional health insurance, especially in light of the fact that they might not cover you when you need it. Really appreciate everything Andy is doing. Of course, if you need help with Bitcoin in proper self-custody, go to thebitcoinway.com/podcast. We would love to walk you through with one-on-one expertise. We also help with online privacy phones, and we have a Plan B residency option. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/podcast. You can also check us out on X. We're at thebitcoinway_. You can follow me there as well at @theothermjordan. If you've enjoyed this video or any of our other podcasts, whether our Bitcoin Banter or the Bitcoin Way podcast, do me a huge favor. Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, comment, share it with someone who you think might be interested. Really appreciate you doing that. As always, remember, stay safe, stay sovereign, and remember, the yield on Bitcoin is freedom.